Let me ask you about another issue, which frankly came home to me as I traveled recently to former Soviet republics, new nascent democracies in Ukraine, in Georgia, and other places. And I would ask our U.S. ambassador at each stop, what's the first thing I should raise here on behalf of the United States when meeting with the president of this country? And he would say, without fail, elections. Make sure you make it clear to them that if they're going to be a true democracy, that they literally have to have clean and fair elections, giving the opposition an opportunity, making certain that people who are eligible can vote. Mr. Attorney General, I've held hearings now in 2 states as part of the Constitution Subcommittee, in Florida and in Ohio, over recent state laws that limit the opportunity of the residents of those states to vote in the November election. In both instances, I have called election officials of both political parties and asked them point blank, what was the evidence of voter fraud in Florida and Ohio that led the state legislatures to limit the early voting period, to restrict voter registration, to put other requirements in the law to restrict the opportunity to vote? And without fail, in both states, they said there was no evidence that led to that state decision. Now, this group, ALEC, American Legislative Exchange Council, has been campaigning across the United States to change state laws. Now, this comes into a voting rights question, which you're well aware of, that is under the jurisdiction of the Department of Justice. And I might add that some of the evidence that's coming out now makes it clear, for example, in the state of Florida, they launched a controversial project that may disenfranchise voters. They are purging voter registration lists of, quote, non-citizens. We can all agree that only eligible American citizens should vote in elections, but Florida's process for deleting people from its registration list has been so careless it is replete with errors. The state created an initial list of suspected non-citizens in Florida who would be eligible to vote. Of the 2,700 names on this list, 87% were minorities. The overwhelming majority of people on the list were registered independents and Democrats. Perhaps more to the point, almost all the people on the state's list of suspected non-citizens are actually American citizens. I raise this point because as we preach to the world the requirements of democracy when it comes to election, the question is whether we are practicing them in the states of Florida and Ohio and so many other places. In light of the Department of Justice conclusion that Florida's voter purge is unlawful, what steps is your department taking or prepared to take if Florida's governor and Secretary of State continue to ignore the Department of Justice order to stop purging its registration list?
We have sent 2 letters to the state of Florida as recently as most recent one was as of last night. I have given the authorization to our Civil Rights Division to go into court to sue the state of Florida to stop these purges, which are inconsistent with the National Voter Registration Act, clearly in violation of the National Voter Registration Act, which requires that there be what is called a quiet period between 90 days between any action that you might want to take and the holding of an election or a primary. My expectation is that suit will be filed within the next 24 to 48 hours. We have done all that we can in trying to reason with people in Florida through the provision of these letters. We are now prepared to go to court.
I hope that's not necessary, but what's at stake is critical. If we are going to preach to the world the requirements of democracy and then not practice them at home, we're going to flunk our own human rights scorecard at the Department of State. And I think we've got to stand up for those elements in our society who have political power, who are trying to restrict the right of American citizens to exercise their right to vote.